much light.
Hang on. Hello, everybody. I was really not ready to start. We had too much light. We still have too much light. Oh, well, it's just the way it is. How are you? I hope everybody's doing fine. We are continuing our series on cognitive distortions. And the cognitive distortions have a twist, of course, which is consciousness, because that's what we do here. And the conscious twist is that we are asking, beyond the cognitive distortion, what the real truth is. And beyond that, what you do instead of going through the old door of the cognitive distortions, which really dictates everything we think and feel and say and do, which is just not in our best interest now, especially in light of consciousness. I'm sorry that we're getting a slightly, I don't know whether we are getting slightly late start, but we had some technical problems this morning. I'm going to announce for you that if blog or Facebook Live go down, please go back to the website and click on the other button. I don't know why we're always having such trouble technically, but we are. We are discussing 50 common cognitive distortions. This was an article that I found on the internet that I thought was very good, that was originally published in, yes, my husband just came in to check, so if you see me nodding in the background, everything's fine so far. Then that was what it was about. This article is by Alice Boyes, B-O-Y-E-S, she's PhD. She wrote for Psychology Today. And she listed the 50 cognitive distortions, which I found very good. I mean, I really do think that if you didn't have these things in your life in very obvious or very subtle degrees, you see, that's what consciousness does. It makes you quite aware of what you're doing subtly, not just overtly. And so we're launching off from this marvelous article and going into a consciousness study of these things. What do you do instead of these things? What's the truth? And then based on that truth, what do you do instead? And that's what the show today is about. That's what all the shows so far have been about. I have repeated myself last week in some of them because I thought they were that important. You know, I hope you guys aren't bored when I do repeat myself, because I want to say that I've always got new stories, new understandings, new things that have happened within the week and a long time ago that I think are good, that give us different aspects of our understanding of what we might be doing. So I certainly don't mind repeating myself. I hope you don't either. You don't mind me doing that either. Let's do a prayer. And then we're going to start back with some of these cognitive distortions and our discussion of them. I hope you've had a good week. It is a beautiful fall. I know you'll be listening to this at all different times of the year, but I'm certainly, as a cold weather lover, I'm certainly glad that we're here. Okay, let's do a quick prayer. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are, all everything is in this world, we thank you so much for our studies, for our coming together and really connecting under the banner of knowing more about you and loving you and letting you through us. Because, dear God, you are the aspect of us in higher and lower degrees. Our conscious journey is to go from the fear-based self, which is still you, to the love-based self, which is all you. Both of these selves exist in us. And we're open now to hearing your voice through us so that you may tell us what we need to do next, where we need to go. We listen during these 90 minutes, and we also will have the chance to listen beyond to the you in us. We ask now, in this prayer, that we know nothing, for it is the you, through us and through all things, that know it all. Move us past our brains, dear God, into the real mind we are, not the child's mind, but the larger mind that sees things in context. We thank you so much. We say this prayer now in your name. In the name of the Ascended Masters and our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of each and every person listening to this show, today or at another time. And so it is. Amen. Okay, here we go. Another cognitive distortion, where we're going to start today, is the failure to consider alternative explanations. The failure to consider alternative explanations. This is a lot of times when we assume something, right? I have a story about this that happened fairly recently. And I think I told this 2 or 3 radio shows ago, but I'm going to repeat it because it's a good one that certainly, I have lots of examples for this one, I guess I said. But this one is a good example. So I have a couple of clients that are dear. They're married. And something happened in this family that one of their children did something. It was unfortunate. It was a bad mistake. And because it happened when the wife was home, she immediately called her husband to tell him about this, and secretly she wanted him to fix it for her because she's coming out of her child's mind, right? What she got a less than stellar response. She was angry. She said he didn't care what happened. He didn't want to fool with us. He didn't care about me because I was upset about it. He didn't even try to fix this. When I talked to him, hello, darling. You're in Peru, Karen? Oh, my word, how exotic. This is so funny that this radio show goes all over the world, and I'm so delighted. I just got, ladies and gentlemen that are on Blog Talk Radio, I often get messages from people on Facebook Live, and I'm delighted when I do, and one of my dear friends is in Peru. Well, that's marvelous. Love you too, darling. Okay, so when I talked to the husband about this story that I was telling, he said, she called me. I just couldn't deal with it. I'm selling my business. I'm moving into a new business. I was in transit from one to the other and all the problems that are coming down in the new building and with what I've got to do and hiring new people and she just didn't understand where I was coming from. When I went back and talked to her, indeed, she didn't understand where she was coming from. She didn't care where he was coming from. And it's interesting, isn't it, that she said he didn't care, but really she didn't either. Wow. You see, we often project onto other people. Thank you, darling. We often project onto other people what we ourselves are doing, which becomes a very important thing for us to take that kind of responsibility for ourselves. But I'm going to put it on the table. That's where you're heading if you're doing consciousness studies. What happens when you do? Instead of your dissolving in the worst ideas you have about yourself, that's where the start of your creating the life you want is. Wow, really? Yes, indeed. Because part of creating, and I know I'm off the subject a little bit, we're going to go back to this, part of creating the life you want is having all the energy that is available to you, but by the way, is your potential, called in from all these other sources. And if we don't take responsibility for ourselves, we're doing this with part of our energy. This, keeping it away. We need it back. All these things that you have held against yourself, all these things you don't accept, are just energy. Call them back. Let them be part of the whole. Because if I say the worst thing you're thinking about yourself, is that all you are? Every single one of your answers is no. And yet that's what you're indulging in when you're doing this, you see? All right. So the failure to consider alternative explanations. It's not just understanding other people like the story I just told. It's also understanding you. You're a whole in-dimensional person. Every single person in this world has done something they don't like. We may have a lot of things we don't like. Part of consciousness studies is to resolve those things within you and realize that they are in the context of a whole life, and that is not all you are. You're not the sum total of your bad decisions. You're a lot more than that. And it's the a lot more than that. It's the understanding that everything is in context of the whole. That we have all that energy come back and can apply it to creating a good life for ourselves. So we've got to be at peace with a lot of these things. We've got to forgive ourselves for a lot of these things, you see? All right. What was interesting about my darling client when I went back to her is that she had married the decision that he didn't care. She had gone back in her trying to mount evidence in this situation against him, that she was all alone, that she always had to do it herself, and that he was somehow letting her down still yet again. By the way, this was based on a fantasy. She had built up her father figure in her mind. She had idealized him. Idealism is not good because it's a fantasy, ladies and gentlemen. It's a kind of fantasy. Was her father ever that glorious? Indeed, he was not. He was just a person. But she wants now, because she idealized the father, this husband to be that. And she's real mad when he is just human. So we had to point out that she was doing that. Because when you marry something, even once you find out the larger truth, that's not good. You have to open your mind. You have to say yes to all possibilities, because if you say no, you can never get around to saying yes. And therefore, the mind doesn't open. And the mind must open for consciousness to take its place. So, when we say, what is the truth? When you have the failure to consider alternative explanations as a cognitive distortion. What's the truth beyond that? That there are a lot of explanations for everything, and that everybody just isn't one thing or two things. We're whole in-dimensional people, and that we must not assume, which leads us to what you're going to do instead of assuming and making yourself unhappy. Because assuming leads to you building a case against the other person, never looking at yourself. That's not great. That's not aware, you see? So, what do we do instead? You ask. You never assume. You ask. I want to put on the table right now that everybody in the world has their own agenda. We're happiest when our agendas match someone else's, like in this radio show. You want to learn something, I want you to learn something, we're on the same page, right? So, what happens with a closed mind is we don't see anybody else's agenda. We only have our own. A much better choice would have been to actually put in your psyche, my mother used to say, put in your brain pan. I love that. All my friends now say, is it in your brain pan yet? Let me put it in my brain pan. All right. A much better choice is to ask, is to say, is this a good time? Assuming that they have their own agenda and it may not be yours. This is a really big problem, particularly in a marriage, but often at work, where we are assuming our agenda is everybody else's, their agenda is ours. That's just not true. So it's a very loving thing of higher energy, of the higher mind, for us to realize that and for us to ask, is this a good time to talk? Are you open to a discussion here? But the other person has to be, if you're the other person, has to be aware if it isn't. Because I know a lot of people that will say, oh, yeah, this is a good time because they just want to get it over with. And it isn't. And in that case, the backlash that you get from something like that, you have created. You understand? Let's go to the next cognitive distortion. It's called the self-serving bias. The self-serving bias, according to Boyce, is people's tendency to attribute positive events to their own character and attribute negative events to external factors. Now, look, nobody likes to realize or to hear negative things about themselves. And if your childhood was filled with it, you might be pretty avoidant about that. But if you want consciousness, and then hence the better life that comes with all of that realization, you have to accept the bad and the good. I think I said last week that I had a dear friend, he was my best friend at one time, Mel Glass. Mel was the one that did I Can't Believe I Ate the Whole Thing, the original commercial. He was a Broadway star. He was a wonderful, wonderful mentor to me. And he's passed now. He told me years ago, Martha, if you believe the good reviews, you have to believe the bad reviews. Better to just be yourself and put everything you've got into the moment that you're in, and then you don't have to look at any of them. I think that's some of the best advice I can give you. You need to know you're doing the best you can from the inside. Now, this requires a very strong sense of self, and most people, believe it or not, come out of their childhood with a false sense of self or no sense of self. Therefore, they're privy to everything that happens externally affecting them instead of knowing who you are. Now, how do you know that if you don't have it? Well, you do some consciousness work on yourself. The irony here, and this is the irony, that if you hold anything against yourself, and the self-serving bias is holding something pretty much against yourself unless you've got an entitlement factor, which we'll talk about in a minute. People that have a self-serving bias often do this in reaction to low self-esteem because they really don't feel they are anything, or they're holding a lot against themselves, which does nothing but undermine self-esteem. The worst criticism you'll ever get is from yourself, you know. It isn't from other people. And if you are so afraid of it from other people, you're probably doing this to yourself. And it's probably so habitual, you don't even hear, you don't even know. Well, hi, Pat, I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you. Hello, sweetness to you. I love this Facebook Live thing because friends show up. So thank you. And some of you all do indeed identify yourselves. It means a lot to me. I want you to know that. So the self-serving bias must be addressed. We've got to see what you are indeed holding against yourself. We've got to realize that, look, we've all done things. We've all said things. We've all seen things that we regret. Much of that has come from us, but not all of it. I think we hold things against ourselves inappropriately in many cases. You know, there's an appropriate guilt when we've genuinely done something and an inappropriate guilt. And so many people have an inappropriate guilt that follows them throughout their childhood. I mean, some people, some parents that are unaware, demand way too much of you. Before you have an age appropriateness to be able to handle what they're asking you to do. We can feel guilty about that we did not meet those standards, that we somehow failed, and we're always going to fail because we were too young to deal with that, you see? We've got to wake up here and realize why we are motivated. Because the thing that reveals whether we have an issue or not is not what we do as much as it is why we do it, why we say it, and why we feel it. Consciousness is looking at those things so we can be free at last. Now, what's the truth about the self-serving bias? Well, the truth is there's a lot more than us. Hi, Lisa. Lisa just popped on. I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad. Thank you. I send hearts back to all of you too. So the truth is there's a lot more to life than just us and just our mistakes. I mean, really, let's put something quite bluntly, and that is it a mistake if you learn from it and self-correct? Oh, happy Sunday, darling. It's a beautiful day, here too. Beautiful fall. If you correct your mistake, if you learn from it, so you can self-correct and go on. And by the way, this happens in a more aware mind than it does in an unaware mind. Consciousness starts there. It isn't really a mistake. No. We must learn to be at peace with ourselves, to have a sense of self. The sense of self and who you really are might not even make a popular decision, but the decision is always based on the right thing to do. Is it the right thing to do, given what you know? Because there's always more to know, but if you're forced to make a decision right now, you've got to make it on all the aspects of what you know right now. And you've got to live with that, right? We are not so grand, as our self-serving bias says, and we're not so the bottom of a dirty bird cage that our self-serving bias says. That's the secret, by the way. The truth is we're everything. Now, let me tell you the advantage of being everything. The advantage of being everything is God is everything. If you want all your energy back to be a manifesting queen and king, you've simply got to accept all of you back and embrace it. This whole idea of pushing it away and pushing unhappy childhoods away and pushing negative things about ourselves away is the wrong direction to go if we want to make peace with ourselves. You're going to have to find the peace by embracing all this. You see? It isn't a question of whether your mother loved you or whether your dad loved you. It's a question about now whether you love you and whether you are being loving so that you can receive that in turn. You understand? Now, there's a self-serving bias that isn't like that. I mentioned narcissism last week. I said there were 3 kinds of narcissism. I want you to know that. The first kind of narcissism is exhibitionist narcissism. That means somebody who's like a P.T. Barnum. We see this in politics quite a lot. For anybody who's looking, it's quite obvious. The problem is it's pathological, okay? This is someone who can't accept anything negative about themselves, and they feel very entitled to be special. We're all special, and we all are not special. in God? Why isn't being human and trying your best okay? It's all you've got. It's the place to start from. All right. The second narcissism is closet narcissism. This is what most people are. It is a narcissism, but you're hiding it. And one of the reasons that you're hiding it pretty well is because you have a soft underbelly that is saying you're not much. And so you're overcompensating, you see. If you overcompensate too much, it's going to be really obvious about what you're doing. Now, I've seen people that are very obnoxious with closet narcissism. They're expressing it very overtly. I've also seen people that are closet narcissists that keep it very secret. And it's only something they're doing in their own heads. Nevertheless, the thing is true. There's a soft underbelly to that kind of narcissism, and someone can get to you. I worked for a company for many years with a department and extensions of that department. It was half the company. I'll never forget this. I didn't have this narcissistic CEO of this company as my client. They had divided, oddly enough, half the company and gave half the company to me and half the company to another company that did peak performance training of some sort. I don't know what they did. I know what I do. That's all. And he was such a narcissist. And by the way, he drove the company to be one of the top 100 companies to work for. And in 2 years, he drove it out of business because he made terrible decisions and was a terrible boss. But by God, he was on that list. Thanks to, by the way, my departments. What I was going to tell you about this is when he lost that company, and it was purely because of him, I don't think he ever came back, because you drown when you have that soft underbelly and you can't sustain your narcissism. Now, his was overt, but he was not an exhibitionist narcissist that does not have the overreaction to who they think they are, you see. Okay, third type of narcissism, I hope does not affect you at all. It is a toxic narcissist, and a toxic narcissist has to do with the kind of narcissism that, I'm going to give you an extreme example, that serial killers do. You know, that they just don't think they're ever going to be caught. Criminals often have this kind of narcissism. Let's go on with what we're talking about now. I think it's really important to just be aware of your tendency to do any of these. Be aware of these things. I hope you're keeping a list. If you have not kept a list, go to Alice Boy's Psychology Today, 50 Cognitive Distortions. I believe that's what this article is called, 50 Common Cognitive Distortions by Alice Boy's. Okay, moving along. The next one of this is attributing strangers' behavior to their character and not considering situational, contextual factors. I think that's extremely important. I wrote a story about this. Actually, I didn't write a story. I wrote a magazine article. I'm a columnist for a conscious magazine called the Conscious Journal. You can find it online. It's a marvelous journal to subscribe to, all about consciousness in all sorts of aspects. So I write a column for it. And the column I wrote, and I think I told the story too, was about a woman who went to the park with her son. She's a client of mine, and she considers herself a very nice person, but when she went to the park, she noticed a man sitting on a park bench who was completely ignoring his son. He was on the phone. He looked like hell. He was all rumpled and wrinkled and looked like, you know, he was on drugs or was drinking or something, and she judged him all over the place, and he judged her, his parenting style. And then the little child that he had there in the park started playing with her son, and she heard him say, "My mommy just died. The only thing I have now is my daddy, my grandma, and my puppy." Boy, did she change her mind. You see, when we judge, we are not seeing context. There is always a backstory. And I think one of the most loving things that we can do as conscious people is give people the benefit of the doubt. Now, that does not mean throw your discernment out the window. I think that too many people get in trouble, and they're trying to be spiritual people by saying, oh, I must love everybody. And I'm saying that you can really love everybody and wish well for everybody if you all do that, if you do that for yourself first. You don't judge nearly as much when you stop judging yourself. The door is open for you to judge others when you do. Let that be a sign for you that you must look internally. I'll say that you are not, if this is an issue of yours, you are not saying your situational, contextual thing. You are not. You are judging your mistakes, even if that is inappropriate to do so. I mentioned that sometimes parents, unaware parents, give us something that is beyond us when we're young. And sometimes they don't give it to us. Sometimes they're very neglectful, and we take on certain responsibilities ourselves. We put too much on us. You're still carrying those issues of being the victim, martyr, savior. And by the way, if you're the savior, you're the victim. All goes together. Victim, martyr, savior, all goes together. It's an issue, by the way. You can care about people. You can want to help in your way. But it becomes pathological when it becomes somebody that you've just got to save all the time. You've got to save people because you become the victim. And this is a pattern. You alternate between victim, martyr, savior, victim, martyr, savior. It's what you do. We've got to lose that. And if you're doing this in an inappropriate way, it's because you have not looked at your own life when these childhood experiences happen and seen them in context. You weren't supposed to save your mother. You weren't supposed to save your father. You weren't supposed to save anybody but you. And you did it by having an inappropriate response to things that was beyond you. And then you grow up thinking you're a failure because you didn't succeed at that. Good. So what's the truth of this, attributing strangers' behavior to their character and not considering situation and contextual factors? Well, I'm going to tell you that consciousness really helps this, because you go back and you look at what you've been holding against yourself and go, my God, I was 7. What am I supposed to do with that? What was I supposed to do other than what I did? I had to survive, right? Okay, but now see it in context with the adult mind. It becomes a blip on the radar screen, and you have a decision now to make, not a reaction that sends you right to the heart of the issue every time, but a choice to not do that again. So the truth is, there's always a backstory. You, as a loving individual, must acknowledge that. However, what is also God-given is your discernment, so that you see all sides of a situation, and you are not letting yourself be talked into, probably you talking yourself into, being a fool for something, okay? Real important. There's a great deal of discernment that says, whoo, I see this, enough is enough for me, because that's the right thing to do for me, and I will love them and care for them, but not necessarily have them to dinner. Okay, good. All right. right, let's move along to the next cognitive distortion of failure, to consider opportunity lost. Tell you a story. I have a friend who is a marvelous photographer. She is excellent. She was doing her first show. I was so proud of her. I'm still proud of her. And she was pricing her artwork, and she priced it way too high. Now, she's unknown at that time, and I said, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to just show that you show your work, or do you actually want to sell it? And she said, oh, I actually want to sell it. Then I said, your price is too high. And she argued with me. She said, oh my God, do you know, we were talking about one picture in particular. She said, do you know how many hours I spend on these things? That time should be compensated. And I said, no, you wasted that time. You made the decision to spend that much time on something and go past the price point that was good for a sale. Now, you have the choice to do that, okay? But that's not smart. You must know when to quit, ladies and gentlemen. You must know when it is not economically in your best interest to keep going. We are all investing too much time and energy in things that don't pay off. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. That just means you have to have that in perspective, right? For example, spending an hour doing a low return on your investment task and thinking, it's only an hour, and not considering the lost potential of spending that hour doing a high ROI task. Very important. So what's the truth? Simply be aware of how you're spending your time, because your time is your money too. It is. It's not just something compartmentalized and separate. Be aware. Awareness is power. And then make a discerning choice of how to spend your time. Now, I do say that it's important to play, so by all means do. But know consciously how you're spending your time. I think I told last week a story. I'm repeating some of this. I told last week a story about a man who was a marvelous musician. He really was, but he was in fantasy about it. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to make a CD. And I said, well, who are you going to sell it to? You don't have a following. I said, you know what you are, because I've worked with him for quite a while. I said, what you are is a fixer. What are you interested in fixing? You're a problem solver. Well, that somehow turned him on in his brain, and he realized he loved IT and coding and doing all that kind of thing, which I don't even begin to understand. And he has distinguished himself so much in 2 years, it's unbelievable. His company loves him, and he didn't even have the job there 2 years ago. He just got it. So I'm real proud of him. Assumed similarity is another cognitive distortion that gets people in a lot of trouble. Assumed similarity. Everybody has their own way of thinking and feeling about situations. You get in a lot of trouble when you do that. I have a friend who has had an issue with always needing to be right. She has very strong political opinions. And it never occurs to her not to send out these really pretty terrible emails. They're very unloving and unkind. I've realized that when she sends them to me, Thank you, Barbara. How sweet. My dear friend Barbara is tuning in today. Thank you. Thank you very much. So she sends these emails out, and I've really learned when I see them coming in to let them go. Now, I don't mind learning new things about either side. I do consider myself a centrist, and I do the best I can with that because often our choices are not centrist choices. But what I'm trying to put on the table right now is that we can't assume anything about another. We must realize that we could be crossing a line expecting everybody, assuming a similarity. Certainly, I can tell in this case that people are not thinking of me when they send me things, because in many cases they're very hateful. And the truth is, I don't want to see something hateful. I don't mind seeing somebody's opinion, but I very much mind seeing something that is hatefully written and suspect, by the way, in that. So the truth is, don't assume similarity. The truth is, we all have a right to think and feel the way we do. And we must consider who we're talking to. There is a communication, and there is an art of communication. Let me put this on the table. The art of communication is knowing who you're talking to and honoring that. So, I think it's very important not to assume similarity, or, by the way, anything else. The truth is, we all have a right to believe and feel, and do, by the way we think best. Hopefully, in that, we're all learning and growing. Some people are, some people aren't. That's their choice too, isn't it? Would you want anybody coming along and taking over your life and telling you everything? No. Telling you how to live and die? Absolutely not. Okay. So what are you going to do instead of assumed similarity? You're going to consider who you're talking to. You're going to now start developing the art of communication. Okay. The next cognitive distortion is in-group bias. The tendency to trust and value people who are just like you or who are in your circle more than people from differing backgrounds. You see, insecurity seeks validation. I want to put that on the table. Insecurity seeks validation. I really do happen to believe that some of the best teams are really diversified. They only work when everybody is generous and not proprietary and batting around marvelous ideas. And I think it's great that people think very differently. But you've got to know how to deal with that, and these cognitive distortions get in the way of that a lot of times. I think it's marvelous that we should seek to know more. We should talk to people. We should find out their stories and what they're like and be keen observers. I do want to say with all my heart that I thought I was a very smart person at one time in my life. I thought I had it all figured out. And then I married my husband, who's Austrian. And his viewpoint of the world was so different from mine. And yet we were so similar in certain personality characteristics. that I opened my mind and learned a lot more. And what's so lovely is he's doing the same thing. So our knowledge base expanded. For heaven's sakes, let's do that. Let's just not surround ourselves with people who are the same. Here's what's oftentimes true about groups like that nobody is secure in who they are. So we have to surround ourselves with people who are equally insecure to validate us. So another choice is to learn how to validate yourself so you don't even need anybody telling you anything. That comes from a strong sense of self and the sincere, loving ability to say, well, this is the best decision I can make right now, knowing what I know. And it's the right thing to do for me right now. Tomorrow I'm going to know something else. Okay. Let's go to the next cognitive distortion. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. It's just true. I remember being a young acting student in New York, and it was so interesting because I was acting my heart out in a scene. I was in a scene study class. And man, did I miss the boat in my interpretation of what was going on in that scene. And when the professor told me what was really going on, oh, I was so freaked out. It was like, oh, why didn't I see that? It was so obvious, right? And this professor said the smartest thing to me. She said, well, you'll never forget it now, will you? And that was true. Now, I'm offering the same thing to you. Life is about knowing what you don't know. Consciousness is about knowing tomorrow and being more conscious of what you don't know and are not conscious of today. Isn't that true? So this old thing about, I should know that, is really a pathological state. We've got to really throw that out because you are aware and you know when you're supposed to be aware and you know. And if you want to speed that up, you'll do some consciousness work on yourself because that's what it does. It makes you more aware on a deeper level. I think of another acting exercise. Those of you that know me know that was my background. Those of you that don't know me might not know. But that was my background. I was an actor. I was a director. Okay. One of the common things that I often recommend for actors to do, that people to do, and this is really interesting, is to team up with somebody. Go to a mall. You, if you want to know this about yourself, go sit in a chair near a coffee shop that is there in the mall. Your friend, who has teamed with you, goes and stops people and interviews them and says, look at that person over there at the table. What's your impression? Are they friendly? Are they not friendly? Are they approachable? Are they not approachable? What are they? What do you think about their attractiveness? How could they improve? What do you think this person is about? What do you think they're thinking about? What do you think they feel? Who do you think they are as a person? Nice, not nice, mean, angry? It's really a marvelous exercise that teaches you about yourself, but you can't be avoidant if you do that, right? You have to take that information and go, well, is this me? Maybe it is one aspect of me. Maybe it isn't. And you have to be discerning enough to say, it isn't, or it is. And you have to be honest, and you have to be real, right? It's a very good exercise, and I don't think it's just a good exercise for actors. It's good for all of us, you know? We should always seek what we don't know. And we should all acknowledge there's plenty we don't know. Why isn't that all right? Why is it all right to say wherever you learned that you had to know everything was wrong information? I remember when I was a little girl, my dad, who was an avid reader, he was a CPA, had a library, and on every wall were books. Okay. And one day he told me, don't ask me why, but one day he told me that I would need to know every single thing in that library. I see you, Jay. I'll be to you in just a moment. And that I wouldn't have to go to school if I knew everything in that library. And so I pulled out the A's of the encyclopedia, right? And I started trying to learn, and I didn't get through but a couple of paragraphs when I said, I think I'd rather go to school. I can't know all this. And of course, we're not supposed to. So why put that pressure on yourself to know everything? Because you're not supposed to know. Here's what you're supposed to know in life. You're supposed to know you. You're supposed to put it to work. And you're supposed to keep learning about you. And that's why I love consciousness studies so much, because that's indeed what we're doing. There's always something more to learn about you. And the interesting thing is, guess what? When you go on that journey to learn more about you, you know who you find? You find God. Because the people that don't like themselves or holding something against themselves haven't, here's the irony, haven't really looked. They don't know themselves very well, because if they look and go far enough past their own pathological ideas about themselves, their God, and their world, they're going to find that they're quite loving people. Every single person is going to find that. But most everybody is avoiding looking. That's the irony. They say they're looking, but they're not. So we got to round up all of that energy of non-looking. What are you doing with it? You're judging yourself. You're pushing energy away when we want to accept it and make our peace with it and go on. Now, I want to go to Jay. He's a dear friend of ours. And then we'll come back to our study. Hey, darling, how are you? Jay, you there?
I think you help.
How are you? I'm doing fine. It's so good to talk with you. I haven't talked to you in a long time, and I was thinking about you the other day. How have you been?
That always happens, isn't it?
Yeah. How have you been, darling?
It always happens. I'm doing fine. Always when people think about me, I always phone them up.
It's true. It's true. We put out that vibe, and there you are. Well, that's wonderful. That's great. Well, tell me what's going on in your life these days and what you're thinking.
Well, it's interesting you say this because, I'm writing actually a little post for a grief group that I belong to on Facebook. And one of them is that, which is a comforting statement. Do you respond to a grieving person? Do you say, I'm sorry for your loss, or say, I can't imagine what you're going through? And it's interesting because I always hear, I'm sorry for your loss, which is a real kind of like the energy of the words is kind of like shallow. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have any meaning for me. Like for me, when I hear that, but when I say, I'm starting to say, I can't imagine what you're going through, and it kind of gives that other person that an identity that the grief is unique, and it's saying something a little bit honorable for that person that you don't even know what they're going through.
Yes.
And you said it's sort of like in what you're saying in your previous conversation. That's why I phoned you up. Is that because we really don't know that other individual what they're doing, or their individual has more of their own identity that we can relate to, even though we try to in our society keep it like they are like everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're talking about, the expectations of life and how we actually play a role in society and how we actually do things things during a given lifetime or even during a given day is we find some similarities, but they're so unique. So I don't think we actually honor each other's uniqueness, whether it's through death or just living.
Yes.
So
I hear you, and certainly I agree with what you're saying. I'm going to put something on the table that you're making me think of, which is perhaps comes out of my journey, so I can only offer you that as something. But eventually, I think I have felt, certainly in my own development, that why isn't everything all right? I hear that you would prefer that people say certain things to you, but that they say I'm sorry for your loss, it may be the best that they can do. And so then I say, well, why isn't that all right? Now, I love what you're doing, and I want to point it out, which is you're seeing how that affected you, and you're changing things to be more sensitive to other people. That, I think, is a remarkable thing, because we can only be responsible for us. But in terms of people's response to us, I think that I try to remember that it's all okay. Everybody's doing the best they can in that moment, and my job is to accept that or not, and I choose to accept that. So I just wanted to put that on the table too, and point out that you're doing something lovely, which is you're noticing the effect it has on you, and you're trying to do something different, which I also think is wonderful. So good for you.
yeah, thanks.
You're
I just hear it all the time. Becomes more, I don't know, sort of like a Christmas saying, you know.
Well, I do understand, but there are people, Jay, that are just never going to ask the questions and have the awareness that you do. And why isn't that all right? That's some of the diversity that I'm talking about. Does that mean you don't love them? No, it doesn't. It means that maybe you're not going to be best friends with them. But it does mean that you can love them and wish them well. And so why isn't that okay? I think the end of all of this, I think at the end of our lives, that we may be asking ourselves, why isn't that okay? And the answer always is, at that point, when we have a broader awareness, it is. I mean, it is. It just is, and that's okay. So I just want to put that on the table. As usual, you're making me think beyond. When I have advanced people in my course that have worked with me for many years, we've laughed that the bottom line to almost everything in consciousness is, why isn't that all right? And any answer that we can give comes from our ego. If we want to say, well, it isn't all right because of this, this, and this, and I'll have these dear people right in front of me, and they'll say, I can't think of anything that doesn't come from the ego child's mind. And it's like, yeah, because the bottom line is, in the broader picture, it's all okay. It's all okay. And I think when we are younger, and that's you, and we can accept that, and we're all in the process of accepting that, accepting what is and that it's all okay is the starting place to really make something of the energy, because you're accepting the whole, and that brings you more energy in this moment, and that's a marvelous creation tool. So I hope that everyone who's listening to the show is not thinking that that's just something that has to happen on your deathbed a long time from now. It can happen right now. It's about spiritual surrender. It's about change, growth, and the opportunity intrinsic in that. And that's consciousness. Thank you so much for calling, Jay. I love you very much. And you always have something to say to us. That means a lot.
Thank you much.
All right, darling. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you.
Okay, darling. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Jay always has so much conversations. And by the way, I encourage you to call in. The number is 347-850-1647. That'll get you on the air. You might want to make a note of that in your address books. And if you ever have any questions or comments and would like to talk on the air, I'd love that. You know, I think that that is a really remarkable thing for me, because one person can't think of everything. And it's you, you know, like Jay calling in and saying what he thinks, that gives me another idea to say something that I might not say without your input, without his. All right, let's keep going. Another cognitive distortion is this: the tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take. I think we must open ourselves to a good sense of time, because while we can say in spirit there is no time, that's true, we do have to work with time and occasionally work in a timeless environment, certainly in my work. I think it's very important, because time is money, that if we're going to live in the world well and be prosperous, we've really got to think of time, and we have to estimate it well. Now, some of you have a better sense of time than others, but I am urging you to think about it. It's an issue when we want to please people so much that we throw our sense of time out the window. When I'm training people to do what I do, and by the way, if you're interested in that, please contact us through the website, www.marthaburgessnovak.net. We are .net, not a .com. By the way, there are easy access on that website to Blog Talk Radio and to Facebook Live. That said, I have to work with a sense of time. I have 90 minutes to do a radio show. I have 2 hours to do a session with you. And when people start working with me, oftentimes they want to please me, or they want to please the client they're working with. They're so thrilled to be working with a client for the first time that they want to please them, and they go overtime, and I say, no, that's not what we do. First of all, it undermines the group, right, when a lot of extra time is given. And second of all, you should develop your sense of time and have an idea where you're investing your energy. And time is energy. People-pleasing is an issue. I think of another man that I just adore. And he does a lot of work for us, and he volunteers for everything. But he doesn't come through always, because he just wants to please you so much, and he loves you so much, but he has no idea how much all of his other work will entail. And so he doesn't come through. Unaware people that don't know what his motivation is, and they don't know how good-hearted he is, just sees him as unreliable. But is that true? No, he has a poor sense of time. So what's the truth? The truth is that while we are all timeless and spirit is timeless, we all have to work within the world and have a sense of time, and it is an investment of our energy. So we better bring all that to consciousness and know what we're doing with our time. We have to have a better sense of estimating our time. If one does not know, say with a project, if you're working in business, how long something will take, then you don't have to give an answer right away. If somebody stops you in the hall and say they need the, remember in Seinfeld, the Pinsky file by 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something, you say, let me get back to my desk. Let me give it some idea, give it a thoughtful time if they ask you how long it's going to take, not at 4 o'clock. I need for you to think about it and make as clear a decision as you can based on all the things that need to happen. And then tell them when you think you're going to get that and be on top of that. If you can't get it to them at 4 o'clock, say you have to call them and say, it's not going to be there at 4 o'clock. My estimate now is 5 o'clock. Because that makes us all feel safe. You understand? It really, there's a safety factor in this, as silly as that sounds. I know when I'm getting it, that's something that I can move off my plate now. And that's very comforting that you're reliable, okay? So what are we going to do instead? You don't have to answer right away. You're going to think through the situation. You're going to start being more aware of where your energy goes. You're going to be a better estimator of time because you have to work in both worlds. Sometimes we work in nothing but the time-centric world. Isn't that all right? If we do, then you better be better at that. And sometimes, in my profession, I work in the time-centric world and I work in the timeless world. But we still have to be aware of those two things, and many times we're not. Okay, let's keep going. The next cognitive distortion. Oh, this is a good one. The belief that worry and overthinking will lead to problem-solving insights. That's absolutely not true. It will make you old and tired before your time. And it is a definite belief that everything is not okay. And I'm saying that the more conscious version of that is that everything is okay. And you've got to learn to work with it. And be creative with it. Worry and overthinking things actually impairs the problem-solving ability. And it leads to, you hear me talking about avoidance all the time, but it leads to avoidance coping. Let me see if I can give you an example of that. I have a dear friend who for years, she's much better now, complained that she never slept. She has searched under every rock there ever was presented to her to find out why she's not sleeping. I've said them in the beginning, although it's taken me a lot of years to get her to listen to me, that she's doing it to herself. She wants to be right all the time. So at one time she never entertained that she wasn't right. She worried and overthought to make sure she was right because she had to be, right? She can't stand to have things unresolved instead of realizing that everything's unresolved until it's resolved. Why isn't that all right? I go back to that, right? But she would just fret, all the scenarios. She'd go into what if. Well, what if? All right? What ifs may never happen. That's pathological too. That's part of this worry and overthinking. And then she wondered why she didn't sleep, because her day would be filled with 5 or 6 of these things. And she never got hold of herself to realize the truth. The truth is that everything's okay. That she's supposed to think about and deal with whatever's on her plate right now. That there will always be unresolved things, but they will resolve in the future. And that she has all the tools and coping abilities inside to be able to deal with that. She will either know or someone around her will know how to do it. That's the truth. She also was overreaching. She took responsibility for herself, maybe, sometime. But she would rather take responsibility for everybody but herself, so she didn't have to think about herself, hence the avoidant coping strategy. So what are you going to do instead of worrying and overthinking? I think meditation's a good thing. It brings you right into the moment. Realize that you're in the past or in the future. And by the way, the future thinking, the what if thinking, is all based on the past and avoid it because you're trying to avoid the pain of the past. A lot of times, this is subconscious. So the nicest thing you can do for yourself is bring in all the consciousness and recognize when you're about to go in that so you can say, whoa, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to substitute a different behavior instead, like enjoying this moment and making it a good one. Knowing that God is here, I'll be prayerful, I'll be meditative. If there's anything that anybody needs to tell me, it will happen. Because God keeps us on the cutting edge of change. We're all intuitive if we will just listen. But of course, most of us don't. Consciousness is the life that most of us miss. And to not miss it, we've got to open our minds. You've got to say yes to it so God can keep us on the cutting edge of change, which, by the way, it always is. Okay. We are almost finished 14 minutes, so I wonder how many more I can get. Let me put in the next one. The next cognitive distortion is biased, implicit, coming from inside, implicit attitudes. Psychologists use a test called implicit association. It's a test that measures attitudes that people subconsciously hold. The results show people subconsciously associate certain words with certain words. For example, one of the things that Boys gives an example is you can associate being fat with being lazy. Is that true? No, it's not. In my classes, I have long since given several tests. The tests are your word associations. What is love? Well, the only thing you know about love until you start doing some work on yourself and make your own choices, because we're always making choices that came from our childhood until we're more aware, right? Is that certain things that happened in your childhood home are now linked. Same word in this case, same as the word as association. They are linked, associated with love. For example, if you had betrayals in your childhood home, if your mother and father betrayed you in any way by not standing up for you and coming forward and protecting you or whatever the child's mind did with that, you've linked love and betrayal together. Well, if you've got anything linked, that's what you're getting every single time you fall in love. Yes. If your parents in some way neglected you, you're actually choosing a partner that neglects you, ultimately, no matter what it looks like in the beginning. Our fantasy says, no, this is divine love. We often, in our unawareness, will choose somebody who will neglect us, and we refuse to see that in the beginning because we're choosing that because it's familiar. Familiar is not always good. We're playing out old patterns. And why do we do that? Well, our ego child's mind says that it's a good thing to play out an old pattern because at least you know where the rocks in the water are. You can negotiate the bad stuff because you've learned to through cognitive distortions. But what if I tell you there's a smooth sailing place without the cognitive distortion, so you don't have to use those anymore? That's what consciousness is, by the way. More and more consciousness. And it's a journey. It's not a place. It's an arena of your thinking, but it doesn't stop there. It goes on and on and on. So your life gets better and better. Biased, implicit attitudes. We've got to find what your biases are attached to certain words. Let me tell you important words to look at this. One of them is love. One of them is family. One of them is God. One of them is you. Whatever happened to you when you were younger, we often have biased, implicit attitudes in our subconscious programming. How do we fix this? We become more aware of what's really motivating us and what we really feel in our deepest, darkest moments. Instead, most people avoid that. Here's the avoidant thing again. I don't want to look at that. We get up and clean the refrigerator at 3 o'clock in the morning when we have too much anxiety. Instead of saying, what is this about? Let's go find out. Let's get beyond this. Let's learn new things to do. The truth is, we all have biased, implicit attitudes. The truth is, we need to bring them to consciousness so we can make a conscious decision about whether we want to keep them or whether we want to get rid of them and do something else. And then what do we do with it? What's the door we go in? The door we go in is to consider yourself and ask whether you still want it or not. And what would be a better reaction than the programming that tells you that you aren't smart, for example. You weren't good in math when you were in school. I want you to realize something. What often throws you and gives you a real negative slant on your life is this universal slam that you put on something like this. I'm stupid is universal. That I'm not good in math is more specific. I'm not good in math. It's not a pronouncement on your life. We all have to be good at something. I'm good at words. I'm good at writing. I'm good at talking and speaking and acting and directing. Visual stuff, I'm good at that. I'm not particularly good in math, and I'm not good in technology. I proved that over and over again to you, don't I? Why should I have to know those things? I have friends that know those things. I'm married to a man that knows those things. Now, that doesn't mean that I relinquish my complete position to them. I've got to be a whole person. But I know that's my shortfall. That's where I'm short. And so I ask for help with that. You see? Okay. All right. So if we're saying anything else from that, I think I've covered everything I need to say about it. I'm going through my checklist in my mind. Dears, I have 7 more cognitive distortions. I'm going to wait and do those next week. We'll be here Sunday next week. What is that? We're already into November next week. Oh my word, I can't even believe it. We'll be November 4th. We'll be talking about the same subject. We're going to do it again, but we'll go into these 7 that you have not heard. And that will be the end of the series. I do urge you to go back and listen. I've repeated myself quite a lot, and I want to say that everything fits together beautifully in this. I'm teaching a course right now and started out with these cognitive distortions because the course is on getting people to think really differently. If you're interested in my courses, please call me. You can find my email through the website, and then we'll give you my number and we'll go forward. But I wanted, with my clients that I see in class, I wanted these cognitive distortions to be the tip of their mind. So they can say, whoo, I am slap up against this cognitive distortion, and I seem not to want to put it down. That's a great investigation for us, because you're going to be better off if all of that energy comes back and is usable to you. These cognitive distortions are making whatever form of energy they take unusable. They're only usable in one aspect, and that's the door you've been going through to deal with this in the ego child's mind. You understand? We have to open our minds and make a different choice. But the only way we do that is to really thoroughly embrace the fact that we're doing this. Dears, it's all very positive. I had a client that would throw her hand up over her head and say every time to me, oh, you're criticizing what I'm doing. Well, that is a wonderful device to keep you out of going past that. I'm not scolding you. I'm not saying anything about you except that you're fine the way you are, and you will be even finer tomorrow if you do some of these things. You're making quite a nice life for yourself. You know you're a good person, and you wouldn't even be interested in listening to this show. Let's just use your potential, which lies beyond these cognitive distortions. That's all I'm saying. Okay? All right, now listen, I love you dearly. Please listen next Sunday to the rest of this and go back. Our shows are archived on blogtalkradio.com under my name and Facebook Live. If you're finding that, and I don't always know without your feedback, whether or not we get a good show that sustains, because sometimes I'm not where I am today, and sometimes what happens is the speed is so slow it doesn't sustain both venues. If so, go say, this is lousy, I'm going to listen to the other one, okay? If you guys will be flexible until we can get our speed fixed, which we will only be able to fix to a certain extent in that other location, I'd be very grateful. I really do appreciate how loyal you are to some of the shows, so that means a lot to me that you are that loyal and that you're flexible. So thank you very much for doing that. Let's do a prayer. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are and all everything is in this world, we want so, hello Angela, we want so to believe that it's all okay, and we want to accept a reality as a place to start manifesting our lives as happier and deeper and more loving. Open our minds to show us what we're doing, and let us know there are indeed other choices to make that are from the higher mind. We have our potential as being the aspect of God we are. We open ourselves to the ascended God beyond the ego child's mind that is still God, to the higher self mind that is all God. And what a splendid journey it is. Dear God, there is nothing wrong with us, except our thinking is a little distorted here and there from our childhoods. Show us what we're doing that we may do something else. Help us ourselves, because it's just part of our humanness. Please move us past avoidance, because there are better and better choices to make from the adult mind. You would never present a problem without a good solution, and we are open to it now. Dear God, thank you so much. We open ourselves now to see, hear, sense, and know what you would have us do as we accept the truth that lies in your enlightenment. We understand it very broadly, and we understand it very personally now. And we say yes to that information. Thank you so much for all of this. And we say this prayer now in your name and in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered
90 seconds.
Our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of each and every person listening to this show. And that's you, ladies and gentlemen. We ask now, and thank you very much, that's the end of the prayer. We ask very much that you go to the website, please, and go to Blog Talk Radio and send this show and other shows that you have liked around to your friends.
60 seconds.
We're certainly trying to increase our base. If you will be kind enough to go to Facebook and all the other things that we're on, we're about to get on Twitter and Instagram and everything else. Please go to those sites and give us a thumbs up and a share and a follow. We would appreciate that very much. We would like other people to know about the show if it will help them. Okay? Thank you so much for listening. I love you dearly. I'll see you next Sunday, 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, because next Sunday we change our clocks. Don't forget. I say that for me more than you, by the way. Okay, see you then, guys. Thank you for everything. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.